On behalf of God, Jeremiah says, "To whom shall I speak and give warning, that they may hear? See, their ears are closed, they cannot listen. The word of the Lord is to them an object of scorn. They take no pleasure in it. But I am full of wrath of the Lord, and I am weary of holding it in. Pour it out on the children of the street and the gatherings of young men as well. Both husband and wife shall be taken, the old folk and the very ages. Their houses shall be turned over to others, their fields and wives together, for I will stretch out my hand against the inhabitants of the land, says the Lord. For from the least to the greatest of them, everyone is greedy for unjust gain. And from prophet to priest, everyone deals falsely. They have treated the wound of my people carelessly, saying, 'Peace, peace,' when there is no peace. They acted shamefully. They committed abomination. They were not ashamed. They did not know how to blush. Therefore they shall fall among those who fall at the time that I punish them, and they shall be overthrown, says the Lord." Even this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Jeremiah's some tough stuff. We're not going to spend a lot of time particularly with him, but we are going to talk about prophets that people did not want to hear from on this day. There is good news in Jeremiah because there is restoration, and there are those who finally do hear that the end of things is not more accumulation, but just justice and shared abundance for all. But on this day, and in this month, we have been celebrating African American and Black History Month. We've been doing this by focusing on our roots, biblically and in the early church. We began in the Bible talking about Moses, how there's no way that Moses would have been able to hide in Pharaoh's home if he was a white guy from Western Europe. The fact of the matter was that many of our early church, as we call them, fathers, were all from the continent of Africa, particularly mostly from the northern African nations of Egypt and Libya and Tunis. But this is a story that has been ignored and obscured. St. Augustine, the great theologian of the church, while buried in Italy, did not spend his living days in Europe. And the depictions of him as a very white man are all falsehoods. He was not. Now, it's important for us to lift this up because through our day we have heard too many times that Christianity is the religion of the slaveholders. But that is not the fullness of the story. And when we talk about Black history, too often we pretend like it begins with the period of enslavement. And that, too, is a travesty. So this month we have talked a lot about theology, and we will talk more about theologians in this week, but I promise not to bore you, or at least I hope not. The fact that many of you are still here means we haven't bored you yet. But in this week, we're going to move forward really far forward. In fact, so far forward, the rest of the people we're talking about in this month are all alive. These modern voices have helped reform and guide and call followers of Jesus to account when we have wedded ourselves too closely as followers to the power of white supremacy. So this week we are hearing from two witnesses who still walk among us, James Cone and Alan Bosak. Some of you might know those names. Both are theologians of the church. Both have been trained as pastors. And each one of these men have changed the face of modern theology and practice, which was a huge part of what they did, during some fairly oppressive times. In fact, if you're interested, after hearing more about him, on April 30th, I found out early this morning, that Dr. Bosak will be in St. Louis at St. John's, the beloved community UCC, just up the street here in the city. He is now 70 years old, and he holds a position actually at Christian Theological Seminary and Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana. But his journey did not begin in a Midwestern town. It began in the repressive regime of South African apartheid. For those of you who are unaware, although I think most of us are, in South Africa, until the end of apartheid, that was a racial classification system that was built upon the idea of white supremacy. And there was 3 classifications in that country: white, colored, and black. And none were supposed to cross lines. Bosak was officially labeled as one who was colored, which meant he had lighter skin, that he was the child of both white and black parents of Afrikaans descent. He grew up as a young man in one of the areas that was set aside just for the colored folk, and became a pastor in what was known as the Dutch Reformed Church. In that denomination, they actually had separate branches for each of the races because as their theology was developed, they believed that God had ordained the separation of the races. And they had fine-tuned that theology so well that they didn't think twice about what was happening all around them because it was the natural order of things. Now, it's easy to stand, and this happened in most of our lifetimes. But Dr. Bosak now, from the earliest work, was steeped and developed liberation theology, right in the very system that did not want to hear it. He was a prolific and is a prolific author and pastor and theologian. But he was also a politician, rising to the ranks within the ANC, the party of Mandela. In fact, in his district, he was the chair. One of his many contributions, though, to the Reformed tradition was that he didn't look at the mess that it had created, not only in his own country, but here, and didn't reject it. He knew that there was something beyond what he had been told. Instead of looking at the faith of his childhood and thinking, well, it supports the systems of oppression, so there can't be anything in there left to be redeemed, he went to the roots of the faith and claimed the tradition that had been denied him. He said what existed was sinful, and it was not an honest growth from the roots of our shared Reformed faith. In fact, in one of his books, 1984, I think, the title of the book, which was a collection of essays, was called Black and Reform, Apartheid, Liberation, and the Calvinist Tradition. Imagine those things fitting together. And he did it really well. In fact, many of the things that we take for granted in our theology today are as a result of wedding liberation theology and our Calvinist traditions. He mounded it in such a way to show that they were not at odds with one another, despite what many theologians believe and believed at the time. Instead, he used the traditions to create a new foundation for the future that we are still trying to live into. So once he had done his early work, he didn't put it on the shelf and say, look what I did. As late of 2008, and he continues to write even today, talking prolifically about the Black Lives Matter movement and how he sees it rooted in what happened in his own country. But in 2008, he did something that shocked most people of faith. He decided to resign all of his positions within the church of the United Church, Reforming Church of South Africa because he was fed up. He was fed up with the continuing discrimination and lack of support for GLBT and I folk within the church. Particularly, he gave up his ordination in that denomination because they refuse to deal with the issue of marriage equality. Even in your 70s, apparently you can change. And as he did so, because he had not always been there, he spoke from his faith. He spoke from his understanding of the Bible, and particularly the Bell-Hart Confession. See, that's what we do. When we try to figure out our own faith, we wrestle with the biblical tradition, we wrestle with our confessional heritage, we look at those who've come before us and say, might we still need to be reformed by the Spirit of God. And he said that the very church which wrote this document wasn't living into it. And his public resignation was part of them changing their mind. It helped begin to move the church, though they are not fully there, to a more inclusive and theologically and biblically sound position. Now, the thing about looking at Dr. Bozak is that we can look at witnesses who live in difficult situations and in great positions where they face great odds in other countries and in other times and go, they are so inspiring. I wish I could be like them. If I lived, then I know that I would be part of that movement. The more uncomfortable task, this is why St. James Cone for the end. The more uncomfortable task is when someone in your own backyard says, don't you see? Can't you see all around us the waters in which we swim in the church, and culture is washed in white supremacy? So now we turn to James. Now, some of you might have heard recently, he had a whole half hour on NPR, or a conversation with Krista Tippett, and as you listen to him, you think, wow, it's really interesting and thoughtful and reasonable, and even just enough prophetic that I'm not too uncomfortable. But the truth of the matter is, when you really hear what he has to say and what he said, when he burst on the scene in the late 60s, he was not a welcome voice. He truly is the father of black theology, of liberation. And he called it that. And he wrote this treatise, this work that basically undermined everything that the white Reformed Church had done pretty much in this country. And in that work, he set the hair of the traditionalists on fire. And he was even accused of being in league with Malcolm X, as if that was apparently an insult. So, James Cone. He was born in Arkansas, and today he is 78 years old. He began his career training to be a pastor in the AME Church, and ended up on a different path with a PhD from Northwestern. In his early work and continuing work, and even today, he changed the conversation, and particularly in his most seminal work, The Black Theology of Liberation, pointed out that theology simply cannot be universal. I know, this might shatter some folks, seriously, even today. Because he said what passed as most theology in America, in the church, had simply ignored the black experience. All the questions being raised in the theological seminaries and divinity schools were all about this universal, otherworldly theology that had nothing to do with the suffering in the street that Jesus was concerned with. And it reminds me that one of my professors at Columbia used to say that the seminary there was 3 miles from the home of Dr. King and the church in which his father served and his grandfather had served, and he occasionally preached. And in the shadow of the civil rights movement, the heart of all that was going on, the greatest argument on that campus was whether or not Mary was a virgin, while people were dying in the streets. And so he spoke to this reality. And he raised the question, where does our theology begin? And whether we want to believe it or not, it begins and is deeply influenced by our experiences. But we don't like to believe that because we want to believe somehow we're dispassionate, distant, and rational, and we're not. Because the truth is, theology is not done in a vacuum. His work is and was rooted, as he said, in the black experience. He focused on the reality of racism in the history of the black church. He brought in the use and the words of the blues and the spirituals and the stories of Exodus and Jesus of Nazareth long before others. He set the bar high. And he said this radical statement: there can be no Christian theology that does not have Jesus as its point of departure. Now we think, well, that seems, of course, that makes sense. But if you find most of the systematic theology, it always begins with the philosophical conception of God, using Greek philosophy even today. But he sought, ultimately, to empower the black church and to dismantle racist Christianity in this country. He said this in his work: oppressors are not generally concerned about any oppressed group. It would seem rather that white rejection of black theology stems from a recognition of the revolutionary implications in its very name. A rejection of whiteness and an unwillingness to live under it, and an identification of whiteness with evil and blackness with good, end quote. But he goes on to say, before you go, well, wait, you can't label all white people bad and all black people good. That's not what he said. He said this, and I think this is the most powerful piece of his work that the theologians and others who were undone with his work did not fully hear. And so I invite you to hear this. He says, being black in America has little to do with skin color. Being black means that your heart, your soul, your mind, and your body are where the dispossessed are. In other words, following Jesus means it is about our location. And he says, to fully follow Jesus, we need to be black. And it's about location. Are we standing where Jesus stood? Are we going to where Jesus went? The outcast, the oppressed? Or are we standing comfortably at a distance and critiquing any, which is exactly what the theological community did to Cone's initial work. Even today, they kind of go, isn't it interesting what he's up to? I know, it's hard to imagine. Let me give you an example. In my introductory Christian theology course, we were given the works of Calvin and Barth's students, and told this is how it works. And then we were introduced to folks like Cone and Bozak and told we were to critique their work on how they were wrong because they did not fit within the tradition. I kid you not. And the professor had the audacity to stand and go, when someone challenged him, I'm not racist, I marched with Dr. King. I'll let that one sink in. Fortunately, I think enough of the students decided, let's be honest. Calvin didn't write his theology in a vacuum. Calvin, for his own part, was a political refugee. Calvin was running from the Catholic Church in France and hid in Geneva, where he knew he would be safe because they would not follow him into the mountains. His theology is steeped in prayer. And one of his greatest works doesn't have anything to do with theology per se. It was how he administrated the whole system. In other words, he made the sewers run on time. He provided water to refugees. That's a whole sermon for another day, by the way, as Calvinists. But it is to say none of the great theologians of the church were writing philosophy. And theology that is not steeped in our own experience, that is not centered on the person and work of Jesus Christ, is probably going to go off the rails and be okay when people at our doorstep are hungry and excluded and thrown into prison because of the color of their skin. I can't but help when I finally heard those voices of Bozak and Cone on my own to think, well, how can you say that? This makes a whole lot more sense to me. And I am thankful personally for their work. The truth of the matter is our faith is always evolving, and as human beings, we don't like change anyway. We're averse to it. Why? Because it's a threat. We have figured out how not to face threats because that might cost us our lives. It's true. And it's normal. So we don't have to beat ourselves up about it. We have to face it and then work to change it, which is what they did. Unapologetically, black and strong. Our faith is ever evolving, but in us must always be rooted in the realities around us. For Bozak, it began in South Africa, but it continues to evolve even today. Cone as well, just a year or two ago, wrote The Cross and the Lynching Tree, comparing the experience of lynching in America and how it intersects with Christian theology in a powerful way. And I thought to myself, how did no one ever think about that before? Thank God for his mind. But I will say this, and we're going to talk about this next week. About as soon as Dr. Cone published The Black Theology of Liberation, talking about doing theology from your experience, having to include that, he was quickly challenged by black women, because he said, you cannot speak to us. We have a different experience and a voice. And so next week we will talk about some powerful womanist theologians, one in particular who's Presbyterian. But this week, as we hear the voices of Cone and the stories of Bozak and what they have done, as we think about our tradition within the Reformed Church and the ways in which we're called to always be questioning the way we do things. Are we embodying white supremacy, or are we seeking to follow Jesus, who was not in the places of comfort? As people who seek to follow Jesus and people of the Reformed faith, their witness shows us we cannot remain complacent. We cannot stop learning and growing, no matter our age. We must never forget that we cannot be church. We cannot be Jesus' followers unless we are standing with those who are excluded and oppressed. Anything else, and the church has sold out to white supremacy.